And things are about to get crazy.
Oh, yeah. The ending of this book is wild. It's one of those stories that just stays with you. Right, and this is where Wyndham takes things to a whole new level. Petra's powers, remember how they've been building throughout the book? Oh, they basically explode.
Hey, ShakesPod listeners. Welcome to our deep dive. It's going to be a good one. We're going to be diving into a classic sci-fi novel that I think is really still making people think. John Wyndham's The Chrysalids.
Yeah, I think this is one that is definitely packed with adventure. But
Yeah,
it really gets you thinking about like what it means to be different and how societies react to those who just, don't fit in.
yeah, absolutely. So let's jump right into the world of The Chrysalids.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what's really cool is that even though it was written decades ago, all those themes of fear and conformity and, the definition of normal, it's all happening today. It's so relevant.
Yeah, it's crazy how relevant it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so the story takes place in this isolated community, right? It's called Waknuk. And it's way in the future. After some kind of nuclear disaster, I think they call it the tribulation.
Right. Yeah. And that's a really big deal because that event really shapes their whole society. They're obsessed with purity. They're terrified of anything that they see as like a deviation from what they consider normal.
Right, right. Like people born with physical differences. I think they're called deviations in the book.
Yeah.
And they're basically shunned and feared by everyone else. Like, can you even imagine?
Yeah.
Living with that kind of pressure?
It's pretty chilling when you really think about it. It makes you think like how easily fear of the unknown can just turn into prejudice and discrimination like that.
Oh, totally. So we meet David. He's our main character. He's this young boy growing up in Waknuk.
Yeah.
A big secret.
Right.
He can communicate telepathically.
Right. And his telepathy, I mean, it's this incredible gift. It's a way to connect with others who feel like outsiders, but it's also a huge risk because they live in this society that rejects anything different. So right away, Wyndham is setting up this amazing tension, like wanting to belong, but also like stay true to yourself.
For sure. There's this part early on that's really powerful. David encounters the community's definition of man. It's like this really strict description of what a human should look like. And each leg shall be jointed twice and have 1 foot, and each foot 5 toes, and each toe shall end with a flat nail. And it just goes on and on.
I always get chills when I read that passage. It's like such a stark image, of Waknuk's worldview. Like anything outside that definition, it's seen as a threat. They actually call it a blasphemy.
Wow. And that's where Sophie comes in. She's this young girl that David makes friends with, and she has 6 toes.
Yeah, that's kind of a big deal in Waknuk.
Right.
So Sophie's family, I mean, they go to these crazy lengths to hide her extra toe. It just shows how deep the fear and paranoia run in this society.
It's pretty heartbreaking. I mean, David, he promises Sophie's mother that he'll keep her secret, even though he doesn't even fully understand why it's such a big deal. He thinks it seemed a very small toe to cause such a degree of anxiety. Just shows how messed up things are in Waknuk.
Right. It's like Wyndham is using David's innocence to show how absurd it all is. The kid, he just sees the extra toe as like a small difference, but the adults are totally freaking out. Makes you wonder, like, who's really being rational?
Totally. And what's even more interesting is that David isn't alone. He discovers that he can connect telepathically with this small group of other young people.
Yeah, and that becomes like his lifeline. They find comfort and acceptance in each other. They form their own little secret community.
I love this one line in the book. David says, "You can't lie when you talk with your thoughts." Like, it just makes you think how genuine that would be and how much we might, hide from each other when we can only use words.
Yeah, it definitely makes you wonder about like all the different ways we can communicate and how those different ways can really build or break trust.
And it's about to get really real.
Yeah, things are definitely heating up. We've kind of seen how fear is driving Waknuk society, but now we're going to see what all that fear leads to.
Yeah. It all kind of explodes when Sophie's deviation is discovered and her family are forced to run for their lives.
Yeah, it's a real turning point in the book, both for David and I think for the reader too. We really see what people will do when they're just driven by fear and prejudice. And we also see how much courage it takes to stand up to that.
Yeah, you're right. It's so sad when you think back to Sophie's mom making David promise to keep the extra toe a secret. She says, if anyone were to find out, they'd be terribly unkind to her. We've got to see that never happens.
Yeah.
Like they were so desperate to protect her.
I know. And that line, it just highlights the power dynamics going on. It's not just about like being different. It's about who gets to decide what normal even is.
Yeah.
Who gets punished for not fitting in. Like those themes are so relevant even today.
Yeah, I totally agree. But the escape, it also forces David to confront some tough questions, too. He starts to realize how dangerous his telepathy actually is, and he also makes some difficult choices to protect himself and his friends.
Right, and that's where the fringes come in that dangerous area outside Wacknuck where they banish anyone who's different. It's a pretty bleak place, but it's also like this kind of freedom, a space outside the rules of Wacknuck.
It's interesting how Wyndham uses that setting of the fringes to explore different ideas about survival and adaptation. The people there have had to come up with these unique ways of living to cope with the environment and, the constant threat of persecution.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And in the fringes, that's where we get this little glimmer of hope, Sealand, this mysterious society of telepathic people that everyone thinks is out there somewhere. It represents like this utopia, this place where people like David can just be themselves.
Yeah. And they have a very different definition of normal. Remember what Petra relays about their perspective. She's got the strongest telepathic connection with them. It's like everybody in Sealand wants to be telepathic, and those who aren't are working hard to develop their abilities.
Well, yeah. Total opposite of Wacknuck.
Yeah, totally.
In Wacknuck, it's a threat. But in Sealand, that's just the norm. Makes you really think about how much our ideas about what's normal are shaped by the societies that we live in.
Yeah, totally. Wyndham really uses the book to challenge our assumptions. Speaking of challenging assumptions, can we talk about David's Uncle Axel for a
Oh,
minute?
yeah, Uncle Axel. He's such a good character.
Yeah.
Like, he's a breath of fresh air in Wacknuck. He's more open-minded. He's willing to question things. And he becomes kind of like this mentor for David. He helps him understand his abilities and the dangers of their world.
Absolutely. I love that conversation they have where he's like, they think they are the true image, but they can't know for sure. And even if the old people were the same kind as I am and they are, what of it? What makes a man is something inside him.
I know, right? It's such a powerful quote. It's like he's giving David permission to be himself, to reject Wacknuck's definitions, to embrace what makes him unique.
And that's a message that's important for everyone, but especially young people who are trying to figure out who they are. You know where they fit in.
Absolutely. Now, Uncle Axel, he plays this vital role in guiding David. But there's another character who emerges as this symbol of resilience. You remember Sophie, the girl with the extra toe? Well, we meet her again in the fringes, and she's a totally different person.
Yeah, it's actually amazing how much she's changed. Instead of hiding, she's thriving. She's learned to fight to survive, and she's even found community in this really harsh landscape. She's like a total badass.
I know, right? And it makes you think about all the strength that can come from facing really difficult things. Think about it. People who are marginalized, they often develop this incredible resilience because they're constantly having to adapt and overcome all these obstacles.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And Sophie's reunion with David is so powerful. They've both been through so much, but their bond is still so strong. There's like this real tenderness between them, even though they're in all this chaos and danger.
I love that tenderness. It really comes out in their reunion. When she sees his injury, she says, "Dear David," she said, "have they hurt you badly, David?" It's so simple, but it's so powerful.
I know, right? It always gets to me. But their reunion is also really tense because, well, the leader of the Fringes group, the Spider-Man, he has some pretty unsettling plans, especially for Rosalind.
Yeah, the Spider-Man's interest in Rosalind, it definitely adds like this whole other layer to the story. He's a fascinating character, but also kind of disturbing. He's a product of Wacknuck's cruelty, and now he's kind of continuing that cruelty in his own way.
Oh, yeah, it's like this vicious cycle. He's been so damaged by the prejudice that he's experienced that he just can't see past it.
Exactly. And Rosalind's reaction to him is so powerful. She says, "I'm frightened of him. He's a different kind. Not like us. Not the same sort at all. It would be outrageous like an animal. I couldn't ever. If he tries to take me, I shall kill myself."
It breaks your heart to see how much this is affecting her, but it also shows how strong she is. She's not going to be a victim. She'd rather die than give in.
Yeah, and that's what makes her so compelling. She's not just fighting to survive. She's fighting for her own agency, her own right to choose.
So you've got all this tension building between David and Rosalind and the Spider-Man. And then to make things even worse, the Wacknuck forces, led by David's own father, decide to invade the Fringes.
Oh, man, yeah. The invasion of the Fringes is like this huge clash of ideologies. And it really forces everyone to make these impossible choices. It reminds us that sometimes the people we think are supposed to love us the most can be the ones who hurt us the most.
Yeah, it's a really intense part of the book, especially when Michael, another telepath, he warns David. He says, they are scared of us, ready to break us down in the attempt to find out more about us once they can catch us. You mustn't let them get hold of Rosalind or Petra. Far better to kill them yourself than let that happen to them. You understand?
That line, it just gives me chills. It shows how far Wacknuck is willing to go to eliminate anything they see as different. They're literally willing to kill their own kids rather than accept them.
And that's where Petra, David's younger sister, comes in. She's been developing these incredible powers throughout the book, and now her powers, they become the key to their survival, and things are about to get crazy.
Oh, yeah, the ending of this book is wild. It's one of those stories that just stays with you.
Okay, so last time we left off, David's dad was leading this army into the fringes to capture the telepaths.
Yeah.
And Petra, Dave's little sister, is like their only hope, right?
Right, and this is where Wyndham takes things to a whole new level. Petra's powers, remember how they've been building throughout the book? Oh, they basically explode. It's like this massive wave of psychic energy.
So she fights back. Like she becomes some kind of telepathic superhero.
In a way, but it's not like she's consciously controlling it. It's more like this raw, instinctive force that just overwhelms everyone. The Wacknuck soldiers, everyone.
Whoa. What happens to David's dad?
He gets caught in it too. Everybody does Petra's power surge. It basically freezes them in place, like they turn into statues. It's really creepy the way Wyndham describes it.
So she like takes out the whole Wacknuck army. That's insane.
Yeah.
But what about the Spider-Man? He's still a threat.
Right? He is. But just when things seem hopeless for David and his friends, guess who shows up? The Sealanders. Remember them? The Society of Telepaths.
Yeah. The ones who think telepathy is normal.
Exactly. They appear out of nowhere in this Sealand aircraft. It's like something out of a movie.
Oh, wow. So they rescue David, Rosalind, and Petra.
Yeah, they swoop in and get them out of there. It's a pretty amazing scene.
That's awesome. But what about everyone else? What happens to Sophie and the other telepaths?
That's the sad part. The Sealanders can only take a few people, and they're really focused on protecting those with the strongest abilities. They see Petra as like the key to their future.
So David has to leave everyone behind.
Yeah, it's a heartbreaking choice, but he knows he doesn't have any other options. He has to trust that the Sealanders will create a better world, a world where people like him can finally be accepted.
It's a really powerful ending. So much hope, but also so much loss.
Right. And that sense of hope, it's really clear in the last lines of the book. Wyndham writes, "A brighter sun than Wacknuck ever knew poured down upon the wide blue bay."
Wow. That's a beautiful image of a new beginning.
Exactly. And I think it leaves us with a lot to think about. Wyndham isn't just telling a story, he's making us question our own beliefs, our own prejudices.
So what do you think is the most important thing to take away from the Chrysalids?
I think it's about challenging what we think of as normal and being more open to those who are different. It also shows us how dangerous it can be to just blindly follow the crowd and how important it is to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's hard.
I totally agree. The Chrysalids is a book that will stay with you long after you finish reading it. It's exciting, it's thought-provoking, and I think ultimately it's a story about hope.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Chrysalids on ShakesPod.
And to all our listeners out there, remember, embrace what makes you unique. And never be afraid to challenge the status quo. See you next time on ShakesPod.